At the back of an isolated farm, something unbelievable happened. A solitary farmer, known for his quiet life and calm routine, made a discovery that would change everything. A woman was in danger, alone and trapped, desperately needing help. But the greatest shock came afterward, when she finally revealed who she really was. The farmer froze, unable to believe what he was hearing. And what happened next will leave you astonished. The cold wind cut across the open fields of Blackwood Farm like an invisible blade, carrying the scent of wet earth and old hay. Ethan Blackwood rose before the sun, as he did every day, pulling on his worn boots and adjusting the felt hat that seemed to have lived longer than he had. Every crease in the leather, every scratch, held silent stories, memories of days that would never return. The routine was harsh, almost brutal, but it was the only thing that kept him grounded. The main barn creaked under the weight of years of use. Ethan went through every corner, feeding the livestock, checking the hay and corn, repairing fences that were beginning to give way. Every step he took was precise, almost mechanical, but there was no coldness in it. There was discipline. He didn't trust people. He had learned early that trusting meant getting hurt. The land, however, never lied. It yielded fruit to those who cared for it, and Ethan clung to that with all the strength he had left. Walking across the fields, he watched the trees sway in the wind, the vast, empty pastures, and felt the weight of loneliness press against his chest. No human voice broke the silence, only the distant low of a cow, the honking of geese flying to safer places, and the creak of the fences. Each sound reminded him that he was alone, truly alone, and that he had grown accustomed to it more than he cared to admit. Ethan paused for a moment, leaning against the rough wood of a fence, closing his eyes. Memories rose like ghosts. The brother who died too young, the friend who betrayed his trust, the love that ended before it even began. People were complicated, treacherous. The land, however, was fair. Perhaps that was why he preferred to speak with the wind and the animals rather than humans. It was simpler, safer. The storm was approaching, and the sky began to darken with heavy clouds. Ethan adjusted his hat and quickened his pace. He needed to make sure the smaller barn was secure, the livestock had shelter, and the fences would withstand the coming rain. Every movement was calculated, meticulous, honed through years of practice. He knew that failure meant loss, and each loss hurt in ways no one could understand. Inside the kitchen, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the aroma of hand-kneaded bread. Ethan sat alone at the worn wooden table, watching the smoke rise lazily from the wood stove. No one called his name, no one asked about his day. He was just himself, a man surrounded by fields and animals, trapped between a painful past and an unforgiving present. Every meal, every task, every dawn and dusk reminded him of his own resilience. The solitude was intense, almost suffocating, yet it was also armor. He didn't need hugs, sweet words, or smiles. He needed control. He needed discipline. He needed to feel that there was still something he could protect, and the farm, with its wide fields, rustic barns, and wooden fences, was all that and more. The day passed with caring for the animals, fixing fences, and walking the fields, always alert for any sign of trouble. Ethan spoke little but thought too much. Every step was accompanied by memories and silent fears. He felt strong, invincible, yet there was a profound sadness that followed him like a constant shadow, a pain that no one saw, a loneliness that no one could fill. When night finally came, bringing the absolute quiet of the farm, Ethan sat by the fireplace. The heat of the fire warmed his body, but not his heart. He watched the flames dance, recalling everything he had lost and everything he would never have. And yet, There was something comforting about being there, alone, responsible for everything he saw around him. It was his life, his land, his refuge, and even with the overwhelming solitude, he felt a thread of control, small, fragile, yet his. Ethan Blackwood didn't need company. He needed silence, routine, and buried memories. Strong, competent, able to face storms and losses with the same determination, he was a man who carried the world on his shoulders and pain in his chest. And so, as night advanced over Blackwood Farm, he remained seated, staring at the fire, solitary but unshakable. Dawn would come, and he would be ready to face it, as he always had been. The morning was clear, but the wind carried the scent of a distant storm, that aroma of wet earth that announces rain before clouds even form. Ethan Blackwood returned from his routine deliveries of vegetables to the neighboring town, guiding his horse with slow steps, eyes alert to every detail of the path. It was a road he knew like the back of his hand, but something unusual caught his attention. Among the trees of one neighboring property, a faint flickering light moved, different from the usual. A metallic creak echoed through the air, strange and out of place, sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. Curiosity and a sense of vigilance combined, making him press his lips together. It wasn't common for anyone to be there so early, much less tampering with barns and fences in absolute silence. He reined in the horse, observing every shadow, every movement. That instinct that made him distrust everything and everyone pulsed stronger than ever. Ethan decided to move forward, guiding the animal along a narrow trail that skirted the property, hiding behind trunks, bushes, and dense undergrowth. Every step was careful, calculated. His heart beat faster. Something was wrong, something that could not be ignored. The neighbor's fence was broken at one point. The wood cracked and twisted, as if someone had tried to escape or enter unnoticed. Ethan stopped, analyzing the terrain. The barn ahead was old, the wood creaking in the wind, short groans echoing, betraying its fragility. But there was another sound, something that stood out from the farm's usual rhythm, a muffled cry, almost imperceptible, echoing from somewhere between shadow and wind. He held his breath. That wasn't an animal, not like that, not with that melody of fear and despair. He moved forward slowly, each step on the wet grass producing minimal noise, yet enough to alert any presence. Every muscle in his body was tense, alert. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, a tightness in his chest, born of the need to protect, even without knowing exactly what. The smaller barn appeared before him, and in a corner he saw a shadow moving oddly, instinctively shrinking back. He approached cautiously, heart pounding. Then he saw her. A small cage, improvised with wood and rusty wire, held a human figure huddled inside. It was a young woman, thin, with tangled hair and fierce eyes that shone with fear. Every tense muscle, every defensive gesture revealed extreme anxiety. She curled even further into the back of the cage, as if trying to disappear. Ethan took a deep breath, curiosity and concern battling within him. Who had put her there? Why? And how could someone keep a life like that hidden from the world? The woman lifted her eyes, fixing them on him with fierce intensity. There was anger, distrust, and perhaps terror. She growled softly, a strange, primitive sound, and recoiled even more. Ethan felt the impact of the situation. Approaching wouldn't be easy, but something within him reacted, an impulse he could not ignore. Fascination mixed with a twinge of attraction to the mystery and vulnerability of her presence. "Hey, calm down," he said in a low voice, firm but trying to sound friendly. "I'm not going to hurt you." There was no answer, just her intense gaze, shallow breathing, and tense body, ready to attack or flee at any moment. Ethan realized that every step he took had to be measured, that every gesture could provoke an unpredictable reaction. He moved slowly, keeping a safe distance, trying to convey calm, but the woman stepped back even further, growling, baring her teeth with the ferocity of someone who would never trust anyone anytime soon. It was like facing a wounded creature, suspicious of everything, even its own shadow. Ethan knew that any misstep could put both of them in danger. The property wasn't his. He didn't know who might appear, and even if he intended to act, how could he free her without drawing attention? The risk was enormous, but leaving this woman there, defenseless with no one around, seemed unbearable. He stepped back a few paces, leaning against a tree, watching her carefully. She followed him with her eyes, every muscle ready to react, every movement calculated. Fear and anger mingled into an almost tangible aura, making the air around them heavy and charged. Ethan felt his own chest tighten, tension spreading through his body. He didn't know if she would attack, flee, or just keep watching him, studying every slightest hesitation. Night fell quickly, tinting the sky a deep, almost black blue, while dense clouds gathered, promising rain. Ethan watched the small woman in front of him, still pressed against the boards of the makeshift cage, her eyes shining with distrust, fear, and something subtler he couldn't yet identify. Every breath she took was shallow, every movement calculated, as if a single misstep could mean the difference between freedom and danger. He drew a deep breath, adjusting the position of his hands to appear less threatening, keeping his voice low, firm, yet reassuring. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Pause. "I can get you out of here, but I need you to trust me. Just a little." The woman huffed, stepping back a fraction of an inch, but didn't retreat completely. Ethan realized it was the smallest gesture of openness she had made so far. He crouched slightly, keeping his eyes on hers, and spoke calmly, almost as if sharing a secret. "Look, I know it's hard to trust anyone. I learned early on not to trust anyone myself. But staying here, you're not safe. I can protect you." The silence hung heavy, broken only by the creak of the boards and the wind blowing through the barn. Then, almost imperceptibly, she took a step forward. Ethan felt a twinge of hope, the first real interaction between them. "What? Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse, a mix of challenge and fear. "My name is Ethan," he replied, keeping calm. "I live on the farm nearby." Pause. "We should get you out of here before anyone shows up." She hesitated, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, suspicious of any movement. Ethan extended his hand, not to touch, but to show he had no intention of harming her. "I know you don't trust me, but trust that I know what I'm doing. We'll get out of here slowly, without drawing attention." For a moment, it seemed she might step back, but finally, with a restrained sigh, she accepted the risk. Every step was measured, silent, as Ethan opened the cage and helped her out. She remained rigid, eyes alert to any sign of danger, yet followed, almost as if the very act of walking beside him was a silent challenge. "Now let's get on my horse," Ethan suggested, pointing to the mount that stood patiently waiting. "It's faster and night is falling." She looked at him, surprised and hesitant, but eventually nodded. Carefully, Ethan helped her climb up first, sitting right behind her, hands steady on the reins. The closeness made his heart race, but there was urgency. The horse moved with silent steps, guided by Ethan's experience, weaving between broken fences and old barns, crossing the dark terrain safely. At every shadow and distant noise, the woman shrank slightly, pressing against him, but did not pull away. Finally, they reached the woods near his farm, where darkness blended with the relative safety of the property. Ethan guided the horse to the gate, opening it carefully, allowing the woman to dismount first. The dim lights of the house illuminated the path, creating a sense of secure isolation, shielded from the outside world. He breathed a sigh of relief, but she remained tense, every muscle ready to flee at a moment's notice. Inside the house, Ethan lit the fireplace. The warmth and soft glow created a sense of security that contrasted with the fear and distrust still lingering in her. The woman approached the flame slowly, watching the reflections dance across her face, revealing a gaze filled with conflicting emotions: fear, sorrow, curiosity, and something that resembled relief. "You didn't hurt me," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "But why you? Why risk yourself for someone you don't know?" Ethan sat on the edge of the sofa, eyes fixed on her, trying to convey sincerity and patience. There was something in his posture, calm, firm, and careful, that seemed a silent invitation to trust, even if she was still terrified. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to be alone, helpless, and to need someone who cares." You pause. "You don't deserve to be trapped. No one does." She stared at him, eyes gleaming in the firelight, and for a moment remained silent. Then she drew a deep breath, as if gathering courage to speak, but hesitated. "What's your name?" Ethan asked gently, yet with intensity, his voice firm, almost as if he needed to hear the answer to understand what she carried inside. She swallowed hard, looking away, arms pressed against her body. The tension was palpable, the distrust evident. No, it doesn't matter," she murmured, almost trembling. "It doesn't matter." "It does," he insisted, moving slightly closer, keeping his distance, but holding his gaze on hers. "I need to know who you are. I need to call you by your name. I need to understand who is here." There was a long, heavy silence. Rain began tapping lightly against the roof, the sound of the wind mixing with the crackle of the fireplace. The air felt charged, every second stretched by an almost unbearable tension. Lillian," she said, her voice faltering but strong enough for Ethan to understand. "Lillian Carter." Ethan frowned, surprised, the intensity in his eyes growing. "Carter," he said, as if testing his own comprehension. "You mean Sheriff Carter's daughter?" Her body curled inward, her hand trembling slightly as it touched the bowl of soup. The fear was almost tangible, but she finally nodded, her voice barely more than a thread. "Yes, I'm his daughter. He thought he would protect me by keeping me hidden, isolated, but I was just alone. Always alone." Ethan felt a shock run through his chest. The girl before him, so vulnerable and yet fierce at the same time, was someone from the local power circle, someone whose presence should have been constantly monitored. And yet, no one seemed to care, or even know her whereabouts. The mix of compassion and the urge to protect her swelled within him. "You've been through a lot," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "But now you're here, with me. You don't have to hide anymore." Lillian averted her gaze to the fire, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. A long sigh escaped her, carrying relief and the weight of accumulated tension. For the first time in months, maybe years, it seemed the invisible prison of her fear had loosened, even if only slightly. She moved closer, keeping a respectful distance, and spoke with restrained emotion. "I've never trusted anyone, but Zeke, you seem different. I don't know why, but I trust you, Ethan." His chest tightened. A delicate bond was forming, still fragile yet intense. Courage and sincerity were building a bridge between two lonely worlds. "Then we'll take care of you," Ethan said, rising carefully. He went to the kitchen, grabbed a bowl, and prepared hot soup. The aroma spread through the air, comforting, almost like an embrace. He returned to her, keeping a distance to let her feel safe. I don't know if I can," Lillian murmured, eyes fixed on the soup. Fear still dominated her. "You don't need to eat it all at once. Just a little to warm up," he said gently. She hesitated, but finally brought the spoon to her lips, the warmth of the soup providing a momentary comfort. Ethan sat nearby, taking a damp cloth to gently clean the dirt from her face and arms. Each gesture was slow, careful, conveying respect. She instinctively flinched, startled, but stayed still, allowing him to continue. "Calm. It won't hurt," he murmured. "I'm just cleaning a bit so you feel better." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, allowing the sense of security he conveyed to begin to sink in, even if only a little. As the cloth passed over her face, Ethan noticed something beyond fear, a spark of curiosity, almost shy. For a moment, the tension gave way to a silent, profound connection, one that words had yet to describe. "Thank you," she murmured, almost inaudible. Ethan smiled faintly, letting the moment settle, letting trust slowly take root. Outside, the rain tapped against the roof, the fireplace cast a warm glow, and the aroma of soup filled the room. Ethan watched her every reaction, realizing that behind the fear and anger, there was someone who wanted to live, love, and trust again. He knew he would do everything in his power to protect her, not just from that night, but from any threat the world might bring. The bond had been formed, the first step towards something greater had been taken, and for the first time in a long while, both of them felt they could begin to rebuild. The morning sun timidly filtered through the kitchen window slats, illuminating the rustic wooden table where Ethan prepared coffee. The smell of fresh bread and newly brewed coffee filled the air, bringing a sense of normalcy that still felt strange and almost intimidating to Lillian. She watched his every move, her wide eyes alert, as if trying to decipher each gesture, each glance. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice firm but warm. "Did you sleep well?" She hesitated, looking away, but answered with a timid nod. "Yes, I think so." "Lillian," he said, his voice steady but filled with care, "I think you need to rest a little. We can't do anything if you're exhausted." She looked away, biting her lower lip, almost challenging him. "But I want to help. I want to learn everything. I can't just sit while you work." Ethan moved closer slowly, gently holding her hands to get her attention, but without pressure. The touch was brief, secure, conveying care. "I know you want to help, and you will, but first we need you to have strength. The work isn't going anywhere, but you need to take care of yourself." Lillian took a deep breath, struggling against the stubbornness that had always accompanied her. For a moment, it seemed she might yield, but then she looked at him determined. "I know I'm tired, but I can do more. I can help." Ethan smiled, a mix of patience and gentle reproach. "All right, but let's make a deal. You'll help me, yes, but in small intervals. If I see you're too tired, I'll convince you, no matter what." He squeezed her hands lightly, holding the touch a moment longer, transmitting firmness and security. She sighed, her shoulders relaxing just a little, but her gaze still carried a silent challenge. "Fine. But you'll have to teach me fast, then." "Fast isn't good for anyone," Ethan said. "Slow is what will make you truly learn." He smiled faintly and placed a bowl of porridge in front of her. "Here, just to start, slowly. You need energy for the day." She looked at the food with suspicion, holding the spoon as if it were a dangerous object. Each bite seemed a silent challenge, each gesture observed carefully, as if learning to trust the routine for the first time. Ethan watched patiently, ready to intervene if necessary, but with no rush, allowing her to set the pace. After breakfast, Ethan led her to the corral. The smell of fresh hay and animals was strong, and Lillian wrinkled her nose, trying to adjust. The horses whinnied softly, recognizing his presence, and Lillian stepped back slightly, unsure. "Don't be afraid," Ethan said, approaching a large chestnut horse. "They can sense when you're nervous, but if you stay calm, they'll trust you too." She took a deep breath, fists clenched. "I've never been near real horses, only in books." "And then today you'll learn," he replied, a restrained smile on his face. "I'll teach you." With patience, Ethan showed her how to stroke the horse, how to speak to him, and how to mount safely. He held her hand to guide it over the horse's mane, his touch firm and secure, transmitting protection. Lillian flinched slightly with each contact, but did not pull away. Every whinny of the horse, every steady step she took in the stirrup was a silent victory. Breathe deeply," he said, placing his hand over hers again, now to help her balance on the horse. "Feel the movement. Don't resist." She closed her eyes, hesitating, and his heart squeezed with concern and care. But when she opened her eyes again, there was a shy, almost imperceptible gleam of trust. The day passed between simple tasks and conversations that slowly chipped away at barriers. Ethan taught her how to care for the chickens, collect eggs, feed the pigs, all the while watching closely to ensure no accidents happened. When she stumbled, he quickly grabbed her hand, a brief yet firm touch to steady her, and Lillian almost sighed with relief, although her body remained tense. "Have you always been so careful with everything and everyone?" Lillian asked, watching him fix a broken fence. Ethan paused, his hand over the hammer. "I've always cared for what matters to me, but sometimes it's hard to trust that people deserve that trust." He paused. "I think that's why I'm so solitary." She studied him for a few seconds, curious. "Solitary, but strong. I can see that. You don't give up, even when everything seems hard." He smiled, a slight arch of his eyebrow. "And you're strong too. More than you think, even if you don't want to admit it." Later, when she knocked over a bucket of water near the barn, Ethan ran to her, gently holding her shoulders to prevent her from falling. "It's all right," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "Mistakes happen. You'll learn." She stood still, staring at him, her big eyes full of fear. A shiver of vulnerability passed through her, but Ethan's firm, secure touch communicated something words couldn't. Trust, care, protection. The days became a dance of learning and care. Ethan showed her how to feed the pigs, collect hay, fix broken fences. Every time Lillian stumbled or hesitated, he was there with a steady hand to hold her, or patient yet firm instructions. His touch, though brief and contained, made every movement of hers seem less frightening, more natural. She began to move with more freedom, feeling the joy of working outdoors, of caring for something that truly responded to her touch and attention. "Have you noticed how much you've already learned in such a short time?" Ethan said one morning, watching her handle the chickens with skill. "And most importantly, you seem lighter." Lillian looked at him, her eyes shining. I feel like I can finally breathe, like I'm not really trapped anymore." She moved closer, resting her hand briefly on his arm. "Thank you for showing me that this is possible." He maintained the contact, firm and secure, but respecting her space. "You did this on your own. I just showed you the way, but it's good to know you're finally starting to feel freedom." The nights also changed. After the work in the fields, they would return to the house, the smell of the fireplace, the warmth of the fire, the comfortable silence of the farm, just them and the animals. Ethan made simple but nourishing meals, always paying attention to every gesture she made, every sign of fatigue or discomfort. He watched as she ate, offering his hand to help her balance when carrying dishes or utensils, and although she was startled at first, she began to accept it naturally, feeling cared for and safe. "You know," she said one night after dinner, "I never imagined life could be so complete, even though it's simple." She smiled slightly, leaning on the table. "Even when I'm tired, I feel like it's my choice to be here." Ethan nodded, looking at her with silent intensity. "Ample life has its challenges, but it also brings freedom. And you deserve to feel that, Lillian." He ran his hand gently through the strands of hair falling across her face, a brief touch yet full of care. Free and safe. With each passing day, the trust and intimacy between them grew. She laughed more, dared to approach the horses on her own, accepted his touch as something natural. He, in turn, felt the quiet pleasure of watching her transform before his eyes, becoming lighter, more alive, and little by little, feeling something more than just protection. an attraction and connection that grew with every gesture, every touch, every shared moment. The freedom Lillian was experiencing was more than just the ability to walk, touch, or care. It was learning to trust, to feel, to open up. And Ethan, always by her side, was the bridge between the fear of the past and the life she could now call her own, even though it was still surrounded by caution and silent respect. The afternoon sun illuminated the barn, casting long shadows on the dirt floor. Lillian was helping Ethan stack hay in one of the more distant parts of the property, too focused on the task to notice every step. The breeze blew, gently swaying her hair over her face, and Ethan watched each gesture with a contained smile, admiring the confidence she already showed in handling the farm work. "Be careful with that bucket," he said, approaching. "I don't want you to hurt yourself," she laughed, glancing away. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." But in a moment of carelessness, Lillian slipped on a stone hidden between the hay and the damp earth. A suppressed cry escaped her lips as her knee hit the ground lightly, scraping the skin and leaving a row of small red marks. She immediately tried to rise, curling inward as though it would be enough to ignore the pain. "It's nothing," she said, trying to laugh, her voice faltering from the surprise. "Just a scratch." Ethan, however, didn't let her continue underestimating the injury. His eyes briefly closed in a silent gesture of impatience. "Don't wait." Before she could protest, he wrapped his arms around her with firm yet careful strength, lifting her gently off the ground. Her body naturally fit into his, and Lillian felt the security of his touch, his strength protecting her. "Hey," she tried to protest, still surprised. "I can walk on my own." "Not now," he replied, his voice low but firm. "I'll take care of you." Every step Ethan took toward the house was cautious, but quick enough that the injury wouldn't be exposed for too long. Lillian felt the warmth of his body, his heartbeat racing against hers, and for a moment, everything around them disappeared. The smell of hay, the sun, the wind, there was only the feeling of him, his security, and a strange but pleasant electricity in the air. As they entered the kitchen, Ethan gently placed her on the sofa, wrapping her in a blanket so she could feel warmth and comfort. Lillian was still trying to hide her knee, but he gently lifted the hem of her pants, exposing the slightly injured skin. "Let's clean this," he said, taking a warm, damp cloth. "It won't hurt, trust me." She took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the sofa, trying to convince herself that it was fine. "It's nothing, Ethan," she murmured, but her voice betrayed the pain. "I know it seems small," he replied with a calm smile, "but every wound deserves care." His hand held the cloth gently, cleaning the dirt and the slight blood with firm but careful movements. "It will sting a little, but it'll pass quickly." Lillian closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand on her skin, the closeness, the exclusive attention on her. A shiver ran through her body, different from fear or pain, something soft and new. "Thank you," she said finally, in a whisper, unable to look directly at him. "Thank you for everything. Once again." Ethan set the cloth aside, running his fingertips over her knee, gently caressing the slightly bruised skin. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air, a tension filled with expectation and vulnerability. "Lillian," he murmured, slowly leaning in closer. "You don't need to thank me all the time, just allow me to be here." She felt her chest tighten, the warmth of their closeness, the scent of him mixed with the comfort of the house. A sudden impulse made her lean slightly forward, hesitant. Ethan needed no further encouragement. His lips touched hers softly, a first gentle pressure, delicate, yet carrying all that had been building between them. Care, attraction, trust, and contained emotion. The kiss was slow, exploring the moment, and Lillian let herself be swept away by the feeling of security and affection. For the first time, she felt something she had never experienced before. There was no fear, no distrust, only the intensity of a genuine touch from someone who cared deeply. Her hands trembled slightly, but found their way to touch his face, hesitant, but longing for more closeness. When they pulled apart, her eyes were shining, her heart racing, and a shy smile formed on her lips. "That was amazing," she whispered, still unable to believe what she had felt. Ethan smiled, placing his hand on hers, squeezing it affectionately. "It's just the beginning," he said softly, as if those words carried a silent promise. "Just the beginning of everything we can live." The rest of the afternoon passed in comfortable silence, with stolen glances, hands brushing unintentionally, and the shared warmth of the sofa and the fireplace. Lillian realized that for the first time in a long time, she could feel safe enough to be herself, to explore emotions and feelings that had once seemed forbidden. And Ethan, observing every gesture she made, knew that first kiss was more than just an act of affection. It was the starting point of something that would change both of their lives forever. The days that followed seemed, finally, light. The routine on the farm settled in, with the sounds of animals, the smell of the field, and the warmth of the fireplace creating a sense of security for Lillian. She was getting used to the freedom, learning to care for the horses, helping with the farm tasks, and each moment with Ethan brought small doses of happiness and trust. There were laughs, discreet touches, shared smiles, and sometimes the comfortable silence of being safe beside one another. But the calm was fragile. A shadow from the past threatened to break this new world. It was an afternoon with a heavy sky, the wind blowing cold and heavy. Ethan was in the barn, checking the supplies, when he heard the sound of horses galloping toward the farm. His heart raced before he could even understand what was happening. The sound of male voices grew louder. The sheriff and 3 men from the town, imposing and determined, were approaching quickly. "Ethan Blackwood!" The sheriff's voice cut through the air like a whip. "I knew it wouldn't take long to find where you're hiding my daughter." Lillian, who had been following him in the barn, recoiled in fear, clutching the hem of her apron, her eyes wide, her body tense. Ethan gently pulled her to a dark corner, his hand firmly on her shoulder. "Lillian, listen to me," he said, his voice firm but filled with urgency. "Stay here, inside the house, hidden. Don't move, understand?" He looked into her eyes, conveying all the determination and care in the world. "I'll deal with them alone. Don't try to leave, don't even look, just stay safe." She hesitated, fear and worry crossing her face. "Ethan, I can't stay here alone. They might—" She began to protest, but he interrupted her gently, yet firmly. "Trust me," he said, holding her shoulders with strength but without hurting. "I will protect you. Just stay here. I'll be back, I promise." She took a deep breath, looking at him with a mix of fear and newfound trust, and finally nodded, retreating to the safety of the house. Ethan gave her one last intense look before turning to face the approaching danger. The sheriff advanced, the 3 henchmen following closely behind, clenching their fists and grinding their teeth. Ethan took a deep breath, every muscle in his body ready to react. The first henchman tried to grab his arm, but Ethan dodged with surprising speed, using the opponent's body against him, throwing him to the ground with force. The second charged with a kick, but Ethan grabbed the leg, unbalancing him, and with an agile move threw him backward. The third came with a punch, but Ethan managed to block it, striking with precision and knocking him down as well. Amid the chaos, the sheriff advanced, furious, ignoring the fallen bodies. "Ethan, you'll pay for this," he shouted, pulling a baton he carried with him. The confrontation seemed endless, Ethan dodging, attacking with precision, each blow driven by the need to protect Lillian. The sheriff advanced, now more cautious, realizing that his rebellious son wouldn't be taken without a fight. It was then that Lillian, hidden, realized that Ethan was in danger. Without thinking, she grabbed a piece of wood near the door and ran silently, adrenaline replacing fear. With all the strength she had, she struck the sheriff on the head. "Father!" she yelled, a mix of fear and determination. The sheriff staggered, fell to his knees unconscious. Ethan looked at Lillian, his heart tightening but relieved, and ran to her, pulling her into a tight embrace, feeling her breath mixed with his own adrenaline. "It's okay," he murmured, caressing her hair. "You were amazing, brave and strong." She, still trembling, held onto him tightly, feeling that in that moment she was truly safe. Ethan smiled, the tension slowly easing, and leaned in, kissing her gently but with intensity. The kiss carried relief, emotion, and the silent promise that together they could face any danger. Behind them, the sheriff lay on the ground, unconscious, his henchmen defeated. After the intense confrontation with the sheriff and his men, Ethan and Lillian's lives were forever changed. The storm that had hit the farm was not just the one from the night of the fight, but the one that followed in the days after, bringing the truth to light. The sheriff, finally disarmed and imprisoned, could not escape the consequences of his actions. The entire small town was shocked to learn that the man once respected in the community had hidden his own daughter in a cage, isolating her from the world to protect secrets no one could have imagined. The sheriff's arrest triggered a wave of revelations. Hidden documents, suspicious accounts, shady business dealings, and old stories no one had ever suspected. The henchmen, accomplices in his crimes, were also detained, and gradually the truth spread, clearing the shadow that had hung over the town for so many years. For Lillian, the feeling was strange and liberating at the same time. She could finally walk without fear, look out at the horizon without feeling the weight of secrets and unjust orders. Each step on the farm was a declaration of freedom, and every touch of Ethan's hand was a reminder of protection and care. He had been her bridge to the world, and now, with the threat removed, they could begin to build something new, together. In the 3 months that followed, the routine on the farm solidified. Lillian became more comfortable, taking care of the horses, feeding the animals, and learning to manage life outdoors. But above all, they learned to care for each other. Small gestures of affection became routine. She let Ethan guide her hand with his. He prepared small surprises for her, both sharing laughter, knowing glances, and moments of comfortable silence. Every day strengthened the bond forged in the heat of danger and mutual trust. And then, on a sunny spring afternoon, surrounded by fields that now seemed endless and full of promises, Ethan took Lillian's hand and looked deep into her eyes. 3 months ago, the world seemed like a place full of shadows. But now, all I want is to walk by your side, he said, his voice trembling slightly, filled with emotion and sincerity. She smiled, feeling her heart race, remembering every moment he had protected her, every gesture of patience, every touch that had taught her trust and love. "And I want to walk with you, Ethan," she replied, her voice firm but soft. "Forever." Not long after, surrounded by their closest friends, the animals of the farm, and the freedom they had finally gained, Ethan and Lillian married. The ceremony was simple, yet full of meaning. The sun illuminated the farm, the wind blew gently, and the animals watched as silent witnesses to a love that had grown amid adversity. The marriage marked the beginning of a new chapter. The intimacy they had built in their days of routine and care transformed into deep love, respect, and trust. Each gesture carried memories of battles overcome, but also the promise of a future full of possibilities. The farm, which had once been just a refuge, was now their home, the place where they could build a family, plant dreams, and live fully, free from the past that had once imprisoned them. As they walked together through the fields hand in hand, Lillian looked at Ethan and said, "I never imagined I could feel so much peace and happiness. You've changed everything for me." He squeezed her hand, smiling, his eyes filled with tenderness. "And you've changed everything for me, Lillian." Together we're stronger. Together we can face anything. The future seemed promising. On the horizon, the farms stretched out in green hills, the sound of the animals, the smell of hay, and the warmth of home filling each day with simplicity and joy. The true love that had been born from courage, patience, and trust had transformed their lives. The freedom they had gained was not just physical, but emotional. They could laugh, dream, love, and build a life together, finally free from the dark past that had once threatened to destroy them. And so, Ethan and Lillian lived the life they chose, side by side, building each day with care, respect, and passion. Their love, forged in danger, protection, and surrender, became the foundation of everything they dreamed of. A family, a farm, a rebuilt life, and the certainty that, together, they could turn any shadow into light. The past was left behind, and the future, bright and full of possibilities, opened up before them, as vast and secure as the horizon they now shared.